Well, let me give you one of the things as a consultant I get asked constantly is what is my opinion as to the difference between education and training. And after years of being asked that question, I finally sat down one day and tried to figure it out. And here's what I came up with, and you're welcome to accept it or reject it as you care. In my opinion, education is the process of moving a person from the specific to the general. Now, what I mean by that is that knowing that 1 plus 1, a very specific activity, equals 2, which is a very specific activity, moves you to the general statement that of arithmetic of the laws of summation kind of thing. So it moves you from a specific example to a more general perspective that you can then apply to your life. Training is the exact opposite process. It moves you from the general to the specific. For example, knowing how valves work helps me understand how a 1-inch valve works, or how a faucet works, or how a 36-inch huge pipe valve works. But it moves you from the general to the specific, because I'm teaching you now, I'm training you on doing a particular task. Okay, now then, what is the difference between all of that and what you think coaching is? Let's see, who haven't we picked on here yet? How about Rolanda? What do you think?
Remember to unmute your mic.
Yep. Okay, well, in my opinion, what coaching is the process that occurs around all of that. In other words, having been educated, having been trained on different aspects of whatever you're doing, whether you're an accountant or a business executive or a high school student or an at-risk child, you have the body of knowledge that you've been educated on, that you've been trained on, and then coaching allows you to take those tools and apply it toward one specific thing. And that one specific thing is that issue, that item, that task, that goal that you have chosen to move forward on. And that can be an infinite number of things that it could be, and we'll get into more about some of the coaching process in a little bit. But I believe that the process of education and training is the toolbox that you draw from to help you have the discipline and scope to move toward the goal that you want. So I hope that makes sense to you. Okay. Now, there's also a couple of different things here. There's a couple of different general categories of coaching. Probably you've heard of life coaches and spiritual coaches, that sort of thing. There's also personal development coaches and business and executive coaches. There actually is a fairly bright line in most coaches' minds as to which direction they are. While life coaches may work with some business people and some executives, they gear themselves primarily toward kind of a more holistic approach to what they're doing. Personal development coaches are frequently people who work with children, youngsters, and young people moving into business, and then other people who, again, address very specifically business clients, executives, and that sort of thing. I can give you an example. The Georgetown University program is exclusively a business and executive coaching program. The program I went through, and I didn't know this till after I got into it, is definitely a spiritual life coaching school, and that was, and it becomes very clear pretty quickly which direction you're going in. But the interesting thing is the processes are essentially the same, but the tools that you use, the outcomes that you're looking for, and kind of the goal set that your clients are looking for define kind of the category of which direction you want to move. Using an engineering analogy, do you want to be a chemical engineer or a civil engineer or a mechanical engineer? They're different. You're still an engineer, but there's different aspects and different callings, I guess you could say, for it. Okay, now, this is, actually let me step out of this for a second. This was areas for which coaching can be beneficial or endless, according to a report by the Industrial Society's Managing Best Practice series that surveyed 5,700 resource specialists. Here's what they came up with. And I take a little bit of issue with some of these, and I'd like to talk to you about that. So some of the benefits for the recipient, and to give you kind of a heads up, this was what Greg was mentioning earlier, that sometimes I'm a bit contrarian about some things. So while this was generally accepted, there are a couple of areas that I actually kind of take a little bit of exception to, and I'd like to see what your thoughts are on that. So the first thing it says is that it generates improvement in individual goals by 84%. That's pretty true as long as the coach is geared toward and is able to help you clarify what those goals are. One of the experiences that I have had is that the very first question that I ask any potential client is, what do you want to coach for? What do you want to do that paying me will help you do? And I would be willing to bet 3 out of 4 times the person has a goal in mind, and by the second session is all, they've changed it completely. Let me give you an example of that. For example, almost universally, people want more money, for example. Excuse me. And so what we end up talking about by the second session is the truth that they're probably not going to change their financial status in the next month or two, but what they really can do is take a look at how they spend their money. And what they're really looking for is not more money, but more disposable money. And so what we can do is we can talk about how to manage their finances such that it doesn't just suck from them every dollar you have, but that you're able to manage the process better so that you do have more disposable money without actually having to generate more income. An increased openness to personal learning and development. That kind of depends. That is so personal. You know, there's 2 kinds of people in the world, people that put people in categories and people who don't. And that's sort of the same thing here, that there are people who are open to learning, and there are people who will just fight it tooth and nail. And so I don't really think that you can improve someone's perspective on learning, but what you can do is you can certainly provide a reason why they need to know more about a situation in order to meet their particular goal. Helps identify solutions to specific work-related issues. Sure, why not? You know, that's yes, of course. Greater ownership and responsibility. Actually, if I were going to do anything, I'd make this one 90% versus about 50-50. In terms of my coaching style, I gear almost 100% on truth in reality. And what I mean by that is what you just said true? And I look very strongly at what are the supporting forces that help you move toward your goal, and what are those forces that inhibit you, that resist your moving forward. And the shock to most people is how many categories of things that they see as opposing forces really aren't true. For example, this is kind of my favorite example. When I worked for Virginia Power, I had a manager who had a sign over his door, and his sign was, no matter what the question, the answer is no. And so people would walk in and have a question for him, and he'd point to the sign, say no, and throw them out. And so talking to friends of mine, they were telling me repeatedly that their boss hates them, and that, you know, no wonder they can't get anything done. He just hates them. And the truth of it is that no, he didn't. He wanted you to come in with a solution, not a question. And if you came up with a reasonable solution, then the answer was always yes. So it wasn't that he hated them. It's just that they didn't understand how to approach him in an appropriate manner to get him to say yes. And so it's all about ownership and responsibility is where I'm trying to go with this. Developing self-awareness. This is another one of those bimodal category things. There are people who are self-aware and people who are not. And I don't think you can beat someone with a stick to get them to know who they are if they don't want to. There are those occasional people who they'll go through an instrument like DISC or MBTI or one of those and just be so shocked at how accurate it is that they become true believers. But if I were going to line up 100 people and run them through all kinds of personal awareness instruments, it'd be the same thing as asking who wants to be self-aware. You know, the ones that want to be will be, the ones that don't want to be won't be. So this actually is almost a zero, I believe. I don't think coaching can really improve that. Improve specific skills or behaviors. The behavior side, yes, maybe. Skills, that's all about training, is where you pick up the skills, and coaching is not the same as training. Greater clarity in roles and objectives, that's the same thing as that first one about individual goals. Good coaching can help you identify good goals. Corrects behavior, performance difficulties. That's a rough one. Coaching itself does not correct behavior. Acceptance of a dichotomy by a client will either cause them to make a change or not. Using my example of this boss with the whatever question he asked, the answer is no, person. And so let's say I had two friends, one who we had the same conversation with, and he goes in and keeps asking the same question and keeps getting a no answer. This is a person who, no matter how much he's coached, is not going to change. On the other hand, the second person who we had the conversation with, and he realizes how to approach this boss and does make that change, then he has made or she has made a modification to their own behavior to be more successful. So the question is the coach able to facilitate the change that a client wants to make in themselves in order to be more productive? And that's kind of a 50-50 thing. Some people want to change, some people don't. Some people, it's actually kind of ironic. They'll call me up and they'll say, well, there's a number of things I want to change, and on the first session, almost the first thing out of their mouth is, well, I really want to make everything different as long as I don't have to change. And that's almost stereotypical. We all, especially as trainers, we can all sit back and chuckle briefly about that. But in coaching, it's so true because it's one-on-one. So as far as hiring me as a coach, my standing first statement is, if you don't want to change and start changing today, I'm the wrong coach for you. I don't want to be your best buddy. I don't want you to know my dog's name. I don't want to know your dog's name. What I want to do is I want to find out how we, working together, can help you reach your legitimate goal more quickly, more effectively. Does anybody have any questions on that? Does any of this make sense at all?
Brian, this is Michelle. I actually had a statement about that last sentence that you said.
Sure.
And that's why I guess I kept thinking that coaching is a partnership. Because, but you were saying that you felt like all the accountability is on the individual. And I would say 75% the individual, 25% the coach.
Okay. But when the smoke clears and the coaching relationship is over, who holds the? And I'm talking about in a business sense, not a sports analogy, but in a business situation, who really bears the full responsibility for the change in performance after the coaching is over?
Absolutely, I do.
Yep, absolutely.
Individual.
And you're 100% correct. And so part of my responsibility as well is to make sure that not only did you hear the changes, but you acknowledge the changes sufficiently that you can continue that same process after the coaching relationship is over. So actually, that was a very good point. Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry? Okay, so what are the benefits of coaching to an organization? So let's say I come into Constellation Energy, downtown Baltimore, and I have some coaching clients there, and I don't, but I'm just using them as an example. What would be the benefit of coaching individuals inside of Constellation Energy? Well, it allows a fuller use of individuals' talents and potential, hopefully, and it's dependent, oddly enough, on one thing. What's the goal of the client? Do they want to become someone of improved talent to utilize their potential better? Then yes, then it certainly is a value. On the other hand, I've had many clients where what they hired me for is to help them get out of an organization, that they feel so stifled that they can't move, they can't breathe. And so oddly enough, it really doesn't benefit the organization. Excuse me, it doesn't benefit the organization as much as it does remove somebody who really shouldn't be there to start with. So I guess in a reverse sort of way, I guess that is a benefit to the company. Let's see, it demonstrates commitment to individuals and their development. Depends. Depends if they're paying for it. And it depends also if the people, the peers, superiors, and subordinates of that individual are able to, number one, tolerate the change of that person, and number two, fully integrate the kind of the new attitude, the new perspective that this person might have. And that's also a coaching responsibility, is to make, to help that person, the client, integrate themselves more fully into the organization. Higher organizational performance, sure, depends what their goal is, but yes, of course, it could be. Increasing creativity, I have no idea how to do that. I'm not even sure I can define creativity to you, so I'm not sure how to increase the creativity, but I will tell you that probably the biggest issue that we really end up working with individuals is, where does their energy come from? I cannot tell you the number of clients that I have from large organizations who show up at work and on minute one they're exhausted. And they might, get enough coffee in their system to charge up for the rest of the day, but then they come in the next morning exhausted again. And I may not know what creativity is, but I do know that showing up exhausted, whether it's mentally or physically, inhibits any kind of creativity that they might have, and certainly does not facilitate them being a good learner at all. Intrinsically motivates people. That's that same double category thing. If you want to be motivated, you will be. If you just want to be a big screaming downer, then that's where you are. Of course, you won't be a client of mine. That if you don't want to change, if you don't want to do it in a positive, productive manner, then we'll just part company pretty quickly, because to be honest with you, I'm pretty expensive, and people deserve to do better, and I'd like to help them do that. Facilitates the adoption of a new culture or management style. Yeah, sure. If for example, let's say you're having a new management comes in and they buy a company, and the new management comes in, and this has actually happened a couple of times, where a company will buy another company, and the client, the individual working like a director or a manager or something, is having a really tough time trying to fit in to the new organization. That's probably about a third of my clients, where they're just struggling to fit in, either after a promotion or just before a promotion, after a buyout of some sort, and they're really struggling to fit into the new organization, and that's something that, that we can work with pretty simply. In terms of improving relationships between people and departments, if you want to, then yes. If one of your concerns is that you're not communicating with your peers, with your boss, with the subordinates, we can clearly work with that. And that's actually probably one of the best things. And I'll say not only relationships between people and departments, but I would say people from departments and people at home. It's really funny. About 99% of all my clients start with the goal of something financial, like they want more money, they need to improve their business model to get another 2% in the next quarter. And then on the second or third session, we end up talking about the fact that they show up exhausted at 7:30 in the morning, and they kind of forget who their wife is, and they never did know what their kids' names were. And we back way up and start talking about how to rebuild communication at home. Then we can bring in that higher level of energy, because you're able to recharge at home, and then you can bring that new energy back into the business. Now you have the tools and the energy, the fuel, to actually move forward with whatever goal you have. It's hard to charge ahead faster and harder when you're running on negative energy. And I don't mean that in a spiritual sense. I mean, if you show up with a deficit of energy, it's hard to apply energy and lead people to the next horizon, sort of thing. Any comments yet? Everybody still good with this? Okay, good. I'll take no comments as good comments. The next thing is what are the biggest differences between internal and external coaching? And boy, has this been something that I have spent a lot of time on in the last 2 years. It is one of the evolutions that's happened with coaches is that it started with external. It's almost like consultants found a new niche to get into, so they've gotten into coaching as a new business model to bring to a client. And the normal evolution is that when it's popular on the outside, then it's a cost-saving device. Companies want to bring an internal because, frankly, they save a lot of money. So let's take a look at what that means. In terms of an internal coach, the best reason for doing it is there's no additional cost. If you train people inside to be coaches, then there's no additional cost. It's easy access for full-time as long as you're obviously an employee, and you definitely know the business more so than an external person would. The difficulty with that is, and here's the highest one, is it's tough to establish credibility. And especially if you're coaching higher than your position. And let me give you an example. Let's say that you are a lead trainer. You're a senior trainer in your department. And let's keep using Constellation as an example. So let's say that you're the lead trainer for CPG, which is their fossil organization for all their fossil plants. And so let's say that you're the lead trainer for that organization. How likely is it that the CEO of Constellation Energy will use you as a coach no matter how qualified you are? And so moving above your level is very tough to do as an internal coach. If you're a training supervisor, it's easy to coach maybe other supervisors, perhaps in finance or operations, but it's very, very tough to go upward. And also, as it has here, is typically a conflict of interest. And this is getting into that agenda issue. And so let me talk about that briefly, and then we'll beat it to death here in a couple of minutes. The first thing that I think is the most fundamental principle of coaching, this is going to sound funny, is no agenda. And what I mean by no agenda is that when I come to a call and I talk to you as a client, you're on one end of the phone, I'm on the other end of the phone, how much do you want to hear about my problems? You know, anything that I want to do has nothing to do with our conversation with you. That it has to be, the coaching conversation has to be about you, the client, because that's what you're paying me for. And if I have an issue, then that's something I have to deal with. For example, I have a coach. And so if I have a problem, I'll talk to my coach about it. But if you and I are talking about it in a coaching relationship, it has to be about you. And this provides a conflict of interest for internal coaches because you have an ulterior motive. You are talking to that person in order to help facilitate them to be a better employee, to be a more productive employee, to have less problems and more benefit. And that may be contradictory to the agenda of the individual. Let's say that the individual, the client, for an internal coach, wants to leave and they're not sure how to do it. Could you coach them into leaving the company? You could, but boy, I tell you, that is not an easy process, and it's very difficult to maintain a sense of confidentiality with that kind of environment. Frequently, there's a bit more reporting required, and so the agenda is definitely shared, which I think, in my opinion, violates one of the initial premises of being a coach. There's one of those coughing moments. Okay, so now let's talk about an external coach coming into an organization. One of the reasons for doing it is that you have immediate credibility. Now, as I have here, it's not necessarily earned. One of the things that I go to every meeting in the DC area about coaches. I think I go to like 5 or 6 a month, and it's almost routine to hear someone who just got their certification as a coach, and they somehow found an executive that would hire them, and they're everything but in tears trying to keep up with this person. They're just really not experienced enough to manage the complexities, not of the job that an executive is doing, but sort of the machinations that the executive is doing. And the executive just ends up running circles around them. Then they come into these meetings weeping and gnashing teeth, and they're really caught way off guard. And that has 2 problems. Number one, it really causes a loss of confidence by the coach, but more importantly is that the coach is really not providing good value to the client, and that certainly brings that client to believe that this is what coaching is, and it certainly is not. So it's presumed immediate credibility, but sometimes, frankly, it's not necessarily deserved. Most external coaches in some way are certified, and that's right up there with saying that you have a degree. You know, there's good programs, bad programs, good learners, bad learners, and unfortunately, coaching has become so profitable that pretty much if you stand on Pratt Street in Baltimore, pick up a rock and throw it, you'll hit a coach. And the question is how good are they? And also, if you become, for example, an ICF coach, and we'll talk about that later on as well, they do bring us fairly significant amount of experience to the process if you find one that's well qualified. One of the contrary indicators is that an external coach can be very expensive. For example, I think, and I talked to some people coming out of the Georgetown program, which is very expensive to get into, and so they charge a lot when they come out. It is not unusual to charge $5,000 to $7,000 for an executive per month to do coaching. That can be very pricey, and that's why you don't see 50 people at a time being coached by an organization. Sometimes scheduling can be very complex. Executives have a wildly varying schedule, and it's tough sometimes to have the external coach have the flexibility to keep up with the variance of schedules that an executive might have, and they don't know your business. Now, let me talk about that for just a second. One of the things that I have found after being a consultant for 25 years is that, especially when I'll address training in the ISD methodology, typically the less I know about it, the better off I am, because then it allows me to ask the stupid question instead of presuming the answer and then really missing what they're saying while I'm sitting here, you know, churning with my own preconceptions. So while it says that it's a con about the business, oddly enough, I think the less you know, the better off you are, because then it allows you to keep asking the client the question about their process and their methodology, and again, staying away from that agenda that I might have. So, for example, as Greg was saying earlier, that I used to work a lot, and still do, work in the electric power industry. I never coach operators. And the reason is that I know their job so intimately that it's more of a consulting relationship than a coaching relationship. Because if they're a junior, if they're a lower level operator, I know what they should be doing. And so instead of asking them how they can improve their performance, I'm telling them how to change their performance, and then they don't own it. It's not theirs, it's mine, and I'm just consulting and not coaching. Okay, so the question is why would any company hire any coach, whether it's internal or external? And so what I've come up with is for internal coaches, typically you'd want to have a coach because the cost is more controllable, and most companies are, let me rephrase that, many companies are willing to offset that cost against a lesser qualification. Not to imply that all coaches internally are less qualified, but many are. Why would they want to hire an external coach? Is because the company, it's the opposite thing. It's because the company is willing to offset the higher cost with a higher level of confidentiality and experience. Many of the companies that I work with, executives, have internal coaching programs, but the C-level people want a higher level coach versus someone who might be, for example, a head of HR, which they would view as a subordinate position, and therefore would have a real complex time, talking about personal issues with somebody internal to the company. So they're willing to offset the higher cost with the confidentiality and then hopefully the experience. Okay, it's time for you all to talk a little bit. Tell me what you think so far. Let me see what the... Okay, so somebody talk to me a little bit and tell me what you think so far. Who haven't we talked to here? How about William Banks? Why don't you talk to me a little bit and tell me what you heard me say in the last little bit here. And I need you to unhook your phone from mute. I need you to talk to me for a little bit. Or anybody that has any opinion on all this. And I'll give you my favorite training line. I get paid whether you answer or not, and I'm really patient. So please, please do speak up.
Come on, group.
You're giving Greg a bad name. Come on now.
Brian knows how to use silence successfully.
Okay. While you're waiting for a good question to come to mind, I'll tell you a story. Greg was mentioning earlier that I do a lot of work out of the country, and probably the most reticent group I've ever worked with were some people from Taiwan. And their culture does not really cause them to speak up against a person of authority. And so we had a conflict of culture there, but nevertheless, I wanted to know where they were, right? This is part of the ISD methodology, is to continuously request feedback. So in the middle of this class, I pulled up a chair, sat down, and looked at the class, and it was a battle of wills as to who was going to blink first. And I sat there for 22 minutes without saying a word until finally one person broke down and asked a question. So if you're wondering if I can wait you out, the answer is you bet. So please do speak up and tell me what you think about what I've said so far.
Okay, first of all, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. With regards to the internal, we do a lot of internal training that relates to coaching for supervisors
right.
in our business, because our business is very technical. It's a large corporate bank that's based in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And what is taking place is we have individuals that are moved from an accountant level to a supervisor level. They have garnered the accounting skills, but one of the things that they are lacking is the skills to deal with their peers.
Right.
Feel a lack of patience, or they just never really dealt with other people very well. So when we bring them into a training environment, usually it's for about 4 to 5 hours, we basically first say that everything's confidential. Whatever's said in the room stays in the room, because we want them to open up and explain what's going on, because what they may go through may be similar to what someone else may go through.
Right.
And by doing that, it allows them to see that they're not in a boat by themselves. And with our bank, they have chose to have us as trainers to take that role as opposed to hiring people from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
First of which, we have a relationship with these people, because as trainers, we deal with the entry-level employees all the way up to the director level.
Mm-hmm.
Based off our experience with them through the years, they feel comfortable of opening up, because they do realize we are a arm of human resources.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand your role as an external, how you can add that additional layer of confidentiality, but for a company like us, we have to be very mindful of budgets and the fact that the company has to respond back to the shareholders to value. And if you spend a lot of money on external trainers, that's money that's coming out of the company's budget.
Of course. As you are.
What was that?
As you are. I mean, you know, every staff versus line position is a direct impact on the bottom line.
But I'm able to take a dual role. I can teach them accounting, but at the same time maneuver myself to teach a soft skill class such as coaching, as opposed to just strictly having me train them on accounting. Mm-hmm. I can basically change hats and go a different direction.
Sure. And I will say that that there are people that, you know, just like there are people who seem to have a natural affinity for for training, there are people that do have a natural affinity for coaching. There are some people that just have that cooperating, collaborative skill, and a number of those skills are inherent in being a good trainer. And I think that the trick to being a good coach, internal or external, is being able to move past just the skill and moving into the affective domain, where you're able to understand that connection between attitude and behavior, between the ability to hear what they're saying and not really answering their question as much as working with them in the white space between the questions. And so it sounds like you're one of those people, and I think that's a great thing.
Thanks.
Sure, my pleasure.
Hello, Brian. I have a question. This is Candace.
Hi, Candace.
Okay. How are you?
Great.
My question is related. It's not related to internal or external coaching, but earlier when you were defining who, like we were talking about football and coaching, and you said that the person responsible for the performance is you know, the football players. So does that, how are you then measured? I mean, I'm sure you know, companies don't just you don't wash your hands and say, okay, well, it's all on you to perform now. How, you know, they're paying you money to, you know, coach their employees. How, you know, how are you measured?
Sure. I am measured in the same way, and I'm not a sports guy, which makes it ironic that I use sports analogies. How do you measure a sports team coach? And the answer is by the number of games that they win. Well, they're not winning them. The people on the field are winning the game. But it's through their, and I use the term very liberally, by the manipulation, by the training, by the facilitation that they do with those players, that the players are able to win the games, and that's how they're measured. Because the opposite is equally not true. If you get a really good sports coach and they lose every single game, is that person a good coach? Well, maybe, but not likely. And so it's the same thing with a business and executive coach. How am I measured? I'm measured by the change in productivity, the change in outcome of the client. And usually in a business setting, we try to establish a criteria as close to the front end as possible. And what I mean by as close to the front end as possible is that, as I was mentioning earlier, more than half the time that when someone comes to me with a goal that they want to reach, we change that goal almost immediately, because that's not really what they want to do. That's sort of how they've been thinking about what they want to do. And so it is part of our agreement with me and the client that the client will relay to someone within the company where they're going, and then the individual is evaluated as a function of how they have moved toward that particular goal, or in some cases it's something a bit more esoteric, like working, playing better with others kind of thing, and just how they are fitting into something, how they are handling a promotion, how they are handling a demotion. And so it's more subjective than you might think, but I think you can quantify a subjective goal if you work at it a little bit, if you make the measurement reasonable and appropriate to the goal that that individual is trying to do. I will make one other statement. Jack Phillips is sort of the guru of ROI. I don't know if anybody here knows who that is. If you don't, you should, by the way, especially in the world of ISD and training and a seat at the table, as everyone calls it. What the seat at the table is really, can you measure the ROI of what you're doing? And the return on investment is very tough to measure, and Jack Phillips is probably one of the most noted and most current guru on ROI. And he and I had a real dust-kicking moment when we were talking about the ROI of coaching, and I really don't think that that's an appropriate measure, because it's changing a perspective, it's changing an attitude, it's changing the goals of the individual, and then the trick is, are those goals contributing to the organization? And that's something that's up to the client, not up to me. Excuse me. And so it's sort of like asking, what is the ROI of your priest or your doctor or some other, health or mental health professional? And so, and I'm not trying to sleaze out of, saying what the ROI impact is, but I have studied that in excruciating detail for years and really cannot come up with a valid ROI for coaching. I can come up with a valid ROI for the performance of an individual that I do coach, but in terms of the coach themselves, if you don't do it, I can't make you do it. If you're my client and we agree to do something and you come back next week and you haven't done it, I have no control over that, and it's the control that is actually the measure of the ROI. And since I do not have control, I don't believe it's a valid measurement. What do you think of that?
I mean, in terms of thinking about how it would be. Hello?
Go ahead, please.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I thought that it would be subjective. It just seems it would be hard to, it would be hard to have an objective way to, especially like you said, you're not the person, you're not performing.
Right.
You can only say do A, B, C. So I guess what you can measure is keeping track of what, you tell the person to do or what advice you give them, and, based on how many objectives they're able to meet,
mm-hmm.
You would move forward. And I guess, I don't know if you would give a report to the clients and say this was what we went through, this was what was met, and this wasn't,
mm-hmm.
and I guess they would be able to make a decision based on that.
Well,
as to whether or not if it was effective.
Yeah, the one word that I would change with what you just said. Most of what you said I totally agree with. Is what you said is what you tell them to do, and coaching is the opposite side of that. That they tell me what they want to do, and then we work toward doing it. And one of the things that you'll see on my process is the development of a work process plan. And so the measurement forward can be measured on the efficacy and efficiency of moving through that plan. And then that's up to them to share with their company to show their progress and value. So,
hey, Brian.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Allie here. I finally can speak. I was riding on the bus for most of your presentation, listening on the iPad, which was exciting.
Yeah,
one question that I had about this, I look at Kirkpatrick's 4 levels, and I think about, when you measure, say months down the line, a change in performance with your people that went through, quote, training.
Right.
In a way, it's a similar dilemma, in my opinion. The training may have been good training, but whether or not change happened, sometimes that's not in the control of the people that are, producing the training.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's out of the control, meaning it might be the environment they're in that causes them not wanting to perform after they've been trained. Same kind of thing with coaching, where you say, I can relate to the individual is responsible for their performance, and therefore you can show them a mirror or different paths or different obstacles in different paths and stuff, and help them along the way, and maybe help them come up with a plan to get to where they want to go once you understand where they want to go. But whether or not they go there, it's like leading a horse to water. You can't make them drink.
Sure.
It's that same thing. I don't think it's that. I think it's similar, though, isn't it, for training? I mean, how do you, can't you measure change in the people and say that it may or may not have a cause and effect with coaching, in the same way that you say training?
Yeah, I think if I were I think that's a great launching point for a question or a comment. I think if I were going to say anything about the Kirkpatrick model of evaluation, that level 1 and 2, I think, is truly where training resides. And then assuming there is a clear and bright line between level 2 and 3 where you're handing it off to go back to the job, I think that's where mentoring really comes into play, is helping that person learn to apply that learning and skill to the job. So you've given them the foundation of making that change on the job. Then I believe that mentoring really helps them integrate that knowledge and skill into the job. I think coaching then is where, and I'm just kind of paralleling the Kirkpatrick model, is that as you're moving into now you've transferred it to the job, how does the person integrate into the job? So it's one thing going to an active listening class, and then you try to do active listening on the job, but to what effect? And how do you do it? And how do you move that information? And how do you personally assimilate into and reintegrate into your organization with that new skill? And I think that's where coaching is really valuable. So it's kind of a parallel thing. In the same way that there's always education as part of training, I think there is training and education that's part of mentoring, and I think training, education, and mentoring is part of what coaching is in terms of a continuously integrating process.
Complete
Does that
package.
make sense to you?
Very much so. Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure. Okay,
Brian,
let's continue.
Again,
Yes, anything.
I just had a statement about the training and the coaching. I don't know if you agree on this. With what we do, the training actually allows us to teach a skill, and when we do an evaluation, you can actually see whether it's right or wrong. Because with accounting, your answer is right or it's not right.
Okay.
But when you're coaching, you're really not teaching an actual visible skill. You're trying to basically either improve or adjust behavior And when we actually provide evaluations to the people's superiors based off how have they performed a month after they took the training or the coaching class,
Right.
it's more based off opinions where you get a little more in a gray area. Would you agree that there's more gray area in terms of evaluating the coaching that's provided versus the training that's actually done in the classroom where you give them the definite skills?
Sure, and I think I'll even take that a step farther and say that I think, and I'll kind of semi-exclude team training out of this for a moment, that when you're learning, it's typically an individual who is learning. You know, I attend a class, I learn something. And I think where coaching is valued is when the question is, how do I now reintegrate into the organization? I know I'm making more of this than it really is because I'm trying to make a point that I think then the question is how do I take that information and integrate it into the reality of the job? And I think that's where coaching really has a good value. So I agree with 99% of what you said. I also think that, and as an engineer, I'm a clear believer in right and wrong answers, and I'm continually beaten over the head about that because sometimes the right answer isn't the right answer, and that has been a constant battle through my entire life because I'm a very black and white kind of guy. I like right answers and I like to be right, and unfortunately with human beings, just because it's right doesn't mean it's right. And so while I agree with you that in accounting it would seem to be that way, but if you, as the phrase goes, you line up 10 economists and 9 will disagree with the other one. So I hear what you're saying, and I have spent my entire life trying to agree with you, and I continuously find myself struggling with the grayness of things. But I agree with what you're fundamentally saying. What do you think of that?
Well, I can see a point. Like, the key thing is I was just curious, how do you go about the evaluation of the coaching they provide to the various companies that you actually work for? Is it like a word-based sample of multiple choice? Because I would see coaching being more required for the evaluation. It's open-ended, where you really want to explain why they feel the way they do and why they respond in the manner they do.
Okay. The easiest way to describe how I'm evaluated and whether and the evaluation is actually pretty simple. Am I rehired or not? I mean, it's a pretty clear, hard, bright line between successful performance and unsuccessful performance. If they hire me, it was successful. If they don't, then I was not. And where that usually shows up, I'm sorry?
No, what I wasn't asking about you personally. I was like, how do they evaluate the coaching that the individual in the class attended? So it wasn't an evaluation of you. It was more the evaluation of the individuals that received the coaching.
Yeah. Okay. The way that that's done, that's what I'm saying is my evaluation is based on the performance of the client. And the performance of the client is measured typically by their efficacy of their plan. So one of the things that you'll see here in just a minute is a map that I use that I've built for doing coaching, and one of the steps is a development of a clear plan consistent with the goal that they specify. And then what's usually done is the client shares that with their boss or with HR, someone like that, depending upon the delicacy of the plan. And then their movement through that plan and the selection of the plan is typically how I'm evaluated.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Sure. If that sounds gray and fuzzy, you're probably right. And do I choke on that pretty regularly? Yes. Because also my reputation is hanging on the line depending upon how well you do the plan that we agreed to. So there is some real vulnerability there. But unfortunately, that's, while maintaining confidentiality, that's probably the best answer I can come up with. That's a great question, though. Okay.
Brian, Allie here. I have one more question.
Sure.
I was thinking about the idea of coaching, and when you're talking about how it fits in, in ISD and what we're doing, and just trying to organize it in my mind, which it feels like one of the more, I don't want to say nebulous, but it's not as easily put in a box.
Yeah.
So, like when I'm picturing almost like an org chart, and I think of performance improvement, human performance improvement as a high-level thing, and saying, looking at raising the questions and doing analysis to find out, is it something that can be fixed by training, and then we have training down somewhere in the hierarchy. I feel somehow when I'm thinking about coaching that coaching is higher up in it, that it's not, that it's closer to performance itself and the issues of performance than it is to farther down the chart of saying there's a specific black and white thing that can be helped by training.
Absolutely.
Does that,
and it's part of that whole network of support that you provide to an individual or a team or a department to be better. For example, if you have 5 people working in a team, and one person is just this miserable SOB who fights at every single step, and this person, I'm being purposefully, positively extreme for a second, and that person receives coaching and is more able to cooperate with the team. Has that improved their performance? Well, not the individual's performance necessarily, because frequently those really annoying people are highly productive. They're just, their productivity comes from draining everybody else around them. So you really can't say that they have improved their productivity through coaching, but they are certainly much more smoothly integrated into the team, which allows the team to be more productive. So it like you said, and I'm agreeing with you, is that it's not a clear, bright line of, $1,000 worth of coaching correlates to $1,000 worth of increased performance. It's a bit more fluid than that. And it's kind of the same nature as almost any other soft skills training. If you put someone through a $5,000 leadership program, are they going to be a $5,000 better leader? I would venture to say no. So it's a tough, the evaluation of coaching is very tough, and it is unfortunately very subjective. A lot of times, way too many times, the evaluation is, I feel better. And that's a real fuzzy response, but that seems to be a lot of how coaching is evaluated. I feel more productive. I feel more integrated. I feel more energized. I feel more capable. And the unfortunate part is when people shift that to, I feel 117% more productive as a result of the coaching. That I struggle with. If you say, I feel more productive and more able to work with others, I'll buy that every day. If you say you're 17% more effective, I would challenge anybody about that. Does that make sense, Allie?
Yes, absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a nice, fuzzy, clear picture.
Yeah. Yeah, clear as mud, right? Okay. So let me get back to this here. So the paradox of coaching that I think is really complex is the more you know about the business, the closer you are in an organizational sense to the client, the more you share an agenda, and I think that really flies in the face of what coaching is really about, which I believe, and this is, again, this entire presentation is my opinion, but my opinion is that the premier foundational statement of the responsibility of the coach is no agenda, that it has to be about the client exclusively. So again, that's a very, very strong opinion that I have about that. Long cough there. Okay, so we beat this to death. Now, what I want to talk to you about, and I'm going to share with you, and you're welcome to take this with you, is the tool that I use for doing coaching. Quick side story here, kind of an anecdote about this. You don't know me. You've talked to me here for over an hour and a half or so, and but you probably can hear in my voice I'm not someone that fails well. I'm one of these straight-A students, and I like outcomes, and like the gentleman was speaking about the accounting issue, I like black and white, I like winning, I like doing well, and I like to be perceived as doing well. So the school that I went through was Coachville, and that's considered kind of a medium-level program, but it met my need in terms of travel, and I could do it all online and all that sort of thing. And it was probably mid-range costing. And so I went through their certification program. And at the end of that, it was, let's see, 250 hours of classroom. And you had to put in 100 hours of actual coaching. And I did all that. And then you have to go through what they call an oral examination. The oral examination is the examiner provides a client. You have to coach that client for 1 hour, and then they grade you on the techniques that you use through that coaching session. On my very first one, I got a 36 out of 100. I was not pleased. So I thought, obviously, there was just an aberration. They didn't really hear properly. You know, I came up with every rationalization in the book. And so I asked for another, and they'll keep giving to you, you know, as many as you want. So I asked for another oral exam, and I got a 32 out of 100 on this one. So I was beyond not happy. So I asked for a debrief, and they kept telling me that I was missing opportunities. But when I asked them, what is the black and white, what's the sign that said that I turned left and they said I should have turned right? And how did I know that? And where was the class that told me which direction to turn? And they really couldn't tell me. There just wasn't the vocabulary for them to communicate that. So I thought, okay, I need to change this real quickly because I needed to finish the program. So I went to the ICF, the International Coach Federation, and they're the ones who really do the final evaluations. And I said, who is the hardest person that you've ever had here? Well, coincidentally, they had just fired this person, this woman, because she was the hardest evaluator they ever had, and she kept failing everybody. So I said, that's the person I want. So she lives in California, and I hired her here in Maryland to, and I flew her out here a couple of times, and I went out there a couple of times, and she mentored me through the process. And I had a terrible time because I'm a black and white guy. If I'm supposed to make a turn, I want to see a left turn signal. I want to see why you need to make that turn, and no one had the vocabulary to tell me. So I thought, okay, here's what I need to do. Oh, and here's, at the bottom of the thing it says, and the bottom of the screen it says, and guess what I was finally told by all these evaluators, you'll understand when you grow up. Well, at the time I was 50 years old. I'm not growing anymore. This is pretty much it. And so what that did was it actually really annoyed me. And I sat back and said, okay, what's your strength? And I said, my strength is the ISD model. I'm a great analyst, and I'm really annoyed, and I'm willing to spend the time to do what needs to be done. So what I came up with is this high-level logic. I sat and listened to 350 hours of certified coaching calls. In other words, the same process that I went through. I sort of surreptitiously obtained 350 hours of these calls, and they were indicated as passed or failed. And so I took the past ones and I went through them and I said, okay, here are common turning points. Here are common avenues or paths through the process. And then I would empirically start hooking together those decisions, those decision points, and then I would run through the failed ones to see if the past one said to turn left and the wrong one said to turn right, it would be clear that that was an appropriate decision point. And so I came up with this pseudo ISD process for coaching, which is desire to change. What are the issues associated with it? How does it look as you move from where you are to where you should be? How do you plan on making that change? How do you start and sustain the action that you need to take from the plan? And then how do you evaluate yourself? I mean, this looks just like the ISD process with different labeling is all. So taking that and then drilling down another level. Okay, let me just run through this real quick. This is all of what I just said. That if you drill down another level, you end up with this. And all this is the same thing. The brown boxes are the, so to speak, the ISD steps, and the colored steps are just the drill down from that. In other words, like in the ISD model, you have to conduct an analysis, a task analysis. Well, there's any number of ways to do that, and every number of situations that will stimulate different responses to that initial analysis requirement. And so going through all of those coaching calls caused me to build this map, is what I call it. It's the concentric, since it's circular like the ISD model, I made a concentric coaching system. And so the trick to my coaching is to follow a thread through this whole thing. So starting from the left, working forward, working to the right is, for example, you have a new client. So they start out at the bottom box, and the first conversation we have is, what do you want to do? And then, do you want to do more of something? I want to make more money this next quarter. Or I need to spend less time at work. Or I'm not even really sure what I want. I know I'm frustrated, but I don't really know what I want. And so we'll talk a lot about that. And then once we decide what you want more of, what you want less of, then we'll prioritize that to figure out which one of those issues that you have, of the concerns that you have, of the goals that you have, what's the highest priority? Which is the one that will help you more smoothly integrate into your own organization? And then we back up a little bit and actually look at what is the motivation associated with your doing that. Why do you want to have more money? Why do you want to have less time that you're spending at work? And what we want to do is we want to put it through what's called a feeling filter to actually move you from, this is kind of a gradient, is from less pain and move to more joy. And oddly enough, almost everyone comes to a coach in pain of some sort. I'm frustrated, I need to earn more money for my family, and I just can't. And so part of my responsibility, what I've taken on as my responsibility, is helping you move from the pain of needing to have more money, for example, to the joy of being a better provider for your family. And sometimes it's really the same thing with merely a different perspective. But I would certainly rather have someone go through all of this process thinking that this is something that's good, that feels good to them, versus something that is merely minimizing their pain. And then you move through all the rest of these. For example, as we move into issues, one of the things that I am kind of known for is sort of a no BS coach. You're allowed to tell me a story once, and I will appropriately feel sorry for you, but that's it. And we actually label stories, and you don't get to whine about it more than once. Certainly if it's relevant to the conversation, we will. But what we need to do is we need to move forward. I don't want you just to keep cycling in the history. The next piece is transitional conversation is massively important. The two big boxes there that you see that have the the wedges coming out of them, are just critically important, I believe, to the coaching process. And the little gray boxes that you see there, emotions, physical, financial, spiritual, self-image, I believe are the primary, the dominant characteristics of, as you'll see to the box to the left, is the internal framework that a person thinks from. And if you look at the bottom, those are external influences to you. That those are the, how does your family influence you, your home space, the people that you work with, where you work, nature and society. All of those things that provide an influence to you. And we do a thing called an environment scan, an EnviroScan. And what that means is that I will have a client will come up with a situation, a goal. We've clarified it a little bit. Then we'll run through this environment scan. And what I want to do is I want that person to tell me quickly, moving through those, okay, emotionally I feel pretty good about it. Physically, you know, it's killing me to keep, you know, working late every night and getting home late, and I come in the morning. It's wearing me out physically. Financially, it's doing good. Spiritually, I'm okay. Self-image, it's okay. You know, it's not an issue at this point. And then we'll work all the way through it. And what seems to come out of that conversation, and it's interesting, the more often we do this, it becomes so fast that what pops out of that is a key statement. For example, we'll be talking along, and all of a sudden the person will say, almost under their breath, you know, if my wife just supported me on this, this would be so much easier. And frequently it's said quickly. They want to move away from it as fast as possible because they can't believe they actually said it. And that key statement now is part of what we need to work with, because then if you look to the right, I want to know what is the consequence of that statement. And is it a non-serving belief? In other words, in this case I'm speaking of a male, and happens to be married, you know, just as a model statement. Is your wife supporting you, but is that true? Is she supporting you and you're just not hearing it? Or is she supporting you but you're not accepting the support? Is that a true statement? And what we need to do to get out of that orange box is we need to find out the truth of what you're feeling at that moment to facilitate the support necessary to get you to your goal. Is what you're believing true? Like I was saying earlier about that boss with the sign over his office, he was not being negative. He was asking you to provide him with a different model of question. And so what I'm asking of a client here in this orange box, and I'll explain the colors in a moment, is what are all of the beliefs that you have about the things holding you back, are they true? And so we'll actually spend maybe an entire session just working through this box. And then once we clarify what you are right now, are today, then you kind of flip over to the future view, and now we sort of reconstruct it. We deconstruct it and then reconstruct it into a model of how you want to be. So the orange box says, here's how I am truly. The green box, the dark green box, says, how do I really want to be legitimately, truthfully, with full integrity? How do I want to be? And then it comes back to the piece in the middle. You have a choice. Are you choosing to make the change or not? And that's why you see the gray box that loops back to what the desire is. Sometimes it pops out, I don't want to do that. For example, what if the box pops out that one of the choices is to leave your company? Well, I don't want to right now. I am being advanced. There's some things about it that I'm not liking. But if that's the choice, and the answer is I don't want to do that right now, could maybe sometime in the future, but not yet. And so it may loop back and cause you to reconsider the want, the desire, the goal that you have, and then we can move back forward again. if you look over in the light green box under strategic planning, strategy planning, there's a thing called force analysis. This is an engineering concept. And all it is in order to be what you want to do, in other words, as you move into the future view, what now are those things which are moving you forward, that are supporting you, that are contributing to your efforts, and what are those factions, what are those factors which are resisting you, that are causing you to not be able to move forward. And one of the conversations that we have is building that entire force analysis. And again, one of the things I'm really known for is really working at removing those things that are not true, that you think are holding you back, so that the truth of it is it's easier to get rid of non-serving beliefs than it is to somehow miraculously charge up with all this new energy to push through it. So instead of trying to bash down a wall, what we're trying to do is see how thick the wall really is first. So if you remove the impediments first, then it allows you to use what energy you have to then move forward. And what we move forward to is the action plan. And part of my process has a large form that you go through to specify exactly what is your goal, what are the steps necessary for you to micromanage the action that you're going to take, how long do you need to do it, is this something you have to do by the end of the quarter, by the end of the month, by tomorrow, by next year. You know, if you need a master's in ISD, you're not going to have it done by next month. It might take 2 years to get through it, but that's part of the plan, and we go into great detail in the action plan. And then under action initiation, I think the most important thing is to verify the payoff. If you're going to go through all the trouble and crap to get through this action plan, because it's not usually something that's very casual and little, it's usually, you know, you're making a pretty big shift in yourself. And if you're going to go through all of that trouble, what for? What is the payoff for it? And I want you to be clear about it. I want you to be specific about it, because then when you do the action, when you finish the plan, I want you to fully embrace the payoff for that. And I think that's something that's really missing in American business is we spend all this time hard charging forward. We cross the goal line, and then all we do is set up the next goal and charge off. No wonder everybody's exhausted by the time they hit 50. I think it's important to validate the payoff, meet the payoff, and then fully embrace the payoff. And the payoff needs to be consistent with the goals, needs to be consistent with your values. You know, I don't think that just because you do something means you get to fly off by yourself to Las Vegas and, you know, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas kind of thing. But sometimes it's nothing more than sitting back to yourself and going, you know, that was pretty cool. I did a really good job. It was consistent with my values. It makes my family proud of me. It makes my kids proud of me. It makes my peers proud of me. And not in a vain sense, but it's like, did a good job. Nicely done. And then you have to commit to it. And you would be shocked at the number of people that I've worked with who will go through this entire process and then will bail on the commitment side because they're afraid in many cases. Most people that I know of are not really afraid of failure. I would say if I were going to make a scale and it totaled to 100%, I would bet, I'm just going to kind of say 30% are afraid of failure. It just scares them to fail. But I would be willing to bet 70% are afraid of succeeding, because that usually means more responsibility, more something, you know, that they have to continue it. There's all kinds of reasons and all sorts of rationale as to why you might be afraid of succeeding, but I would bet more people are afraid of succeeding than they are of failing. And as you move across to the clarified status, this is all about feedback. And this is the loop that we get into as a coach, where sometimes you might, as you see the little gray arrow there, coming back down to strategic planning, Sometimes we need to take a look at the plan and tweak it a little bit. We need to revise it a little bit. I'm not real big on let's just scrap it and build another one because you're afraid. But sometimes you're just too afraid, and let's just back it down a little bit and make it a little bit easier. Because I'd rather have you do something successful a couple of times and escalate into a bigger change than I would just come in and have you arbitrarily make some massive change to yourself and fail. So the feedback loop is very important, and again, just like in the ISD methodology, when you have the evaluation phase, you're adjusting the program, not the individual, and exactly the same here. We're going to loop back around. You come in at the existing level, and we just zip through it. We make sure that the transitional conversations are still valid, that the strategic planning is still valid, and that you are still committed to the plan. And then all we do is we just keep cycling through it. And it's my job to help you embrace it. It's my job to help you applaud yourself for doing it. And it's my job to help you keep moving through this in a consistent manner. Whew. Okay. This is all I'm doing is just describing what I just talked about. Let me back up a little bit here.
Hey, Brian.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Brian. Is
Yes,
it
ma'am.
safe to say that the difference between coaching and training is that it seems like coaching gets more personal and more on a mental level? It deals with some of the aspects of, to be, they say to be a good learner, you have to be motivated. That's like number one on the list. And it sounds like with coaching, you really go into the learner and why they are the way that they are and how they learn it. Where training, it's kind of like it's not as personal. You give them some reasons why they would benefit from the training, but it doesn't go into the weeds.
Well, one of the differentiators that I use is that with training, I've already asked you what you want. Now I'm telling you what you asked for. And I think that's part of what the task analysis process is about is, hey, what do you want in your training? I'll ask your supervisor, I'll ask you, I'll ask other job incumbents, and I'll find out what the gap is between what you're supposed to be able to do and generally what the audience needs to be able to do. And I'll look at that audience analysis, the gap analysis, and that's presumably where the training comes from. The truth of the matter is most training comes from whoever's developing its opinion to a large extent, and I think good training comes from good analysis, good audience analysis, good gap analysis. But once you finish the analysis, then you're telling them what to do. Okay, here's the objectives, here's what I want you to do, here's how I'm going to evaluate you. You're telling them what to do at that point. And a good trainer will meet the gap, not merely just tell them what to do. In coaching, it's almost the opposite. It's almost like having a classroom where you have one student and you're kind of sitting behind them a little bit, and they're saying out loud, I really need to be able to do this. And you keep leaning over their shoulder and saying, what makes you think you need to do that? Why do you think that has to be done? What would be the consequence of not being able to do it? What are the things that are stopping you from doing it already? And so it's kind of, I heard a great definition of coaching, which was it's leading from behind. And so it's almost like that leaning over their shoulder, helping them, you asking the right question, and them considering themselves and answering the question. So you're sort of guiding them gently with questions, but the answers are the right one. Whatever it is, that's the right answer for them. And again, that's part of that no agenda thing. So is that consistent with what you're saying?
Yeah, it is. I mean, coaching is more on a personal level, like more of a one-on-one attention versus training.
Yeah, but what differentiates it, I think, from one-on-one training is still in training, you're still telling them something. And in coaching, you don't tell people stuff.
You're guiding them.
You guide them through questions, not through answers.
Got you. That makes perfect sense.
and I will tell you, I was a consultant for almost 15 years before I was a coach, and that was the hardest change I had to experience, because I had made a career out of telling people what to do, in nice ways, subtle ways, manipulative ways, but nevertheless telling them what to do. And to then kind of sit behind them and guide them with the right question was miserable, because sometimes I did know the right answer. And there are techniques for imposing an answer, but the rule, so to speak, is you're not supposed to tell them what to do, that it's supposed to be a self-discovery kind of thing. Okay. The way that I do that, because like I said, sometimes you do know the right answer, is that I will only tell you my opinion if it is amongst 3 or 4 other alternatives. Then you have to pick the one that suits you. And so you'll come up with 3 or 4, I'll come up with 1 or 2 that goes in the pot, but then you have to pick the one that is consistent with your reality, your environment, your values. Then we'll go with that one.
Brian, this
Yes,
is
ma'am.
Maureen.
Hi,
This is
Maureen.
Maureen. I've been having trouble all night with my audio and being able to chime in, so I'm glad it's working. But
Yes, it is.
this little analogy comes to mind for me. It's, and I might be dating myself, the Flintstones was popular when I was a child, and I think about that great Gonzo, that little blue guy that would hang out on Fred and Barney's shoulder the whole entire time that they were trying to make decisions.
Sure, sure. And also, one of the things about the great Gonzo was he wasn't always right.
Right.
And so that's one of the things you have to be careful of as a coach, is that it's very easy to impose your will on somebody that you're coaching. Once they kind of cross that point of who the heck are you, then you very quickly move into a highly credible position. And you have to be very careful what you tell a client, because they'll do it. And then when it comes back down to evaluating the performance, whose performance is it? Well, you told me to do that, and it didn't work. And so you have to be very careful whose opinion causes the client to move forward. And so it's not evading responsibility. It isn't your responsibility. And so they have to make the decision, and it has to be based on their values, consistent with their model, that sort of thing. In a sense, it's kind of like consulting in general. It's always been my job to tell people what to do. But what is the responsibility that you have in that telling? The answer is, you better be right, or you're not going to be employed the second time. And so the responsibility in consulting is you have to be right. Or and I'm differentiating a contractor where they tell you what to do from a consultant where you are basically telling somebody what to do. And the difference is in consulting, you have to be right. Well, in coaching, you have to help the client identify what is right for them. And sometimes that is not an easy task. Sometimes they have the goal in mind and off they go. And sometimes that goal is really not consistent with what they really want to do. They'll tell you that they want to spend more time with their family, and then they'll spend the next month telling you about how they wanted to take on a new task that'll cause them to work till 9 o'clock at night. Well, wait a second. Back there you said that one of your high values was you want to spend a lot of time with your family, and then we're spending the next 8 weeks constructing a lifestyle where you're not going to be home till 10 o'clock at night. So where are your values? Where do you really want to be? And it's very eye-opening to a lot of clients. It's very eye-opening. So what do you think of this process? Does this make any sense to you? Oh, let me tell you the consequence of this, by the way, too, is the day I came up with this, I submitted for another evaluation, another oral evaluation. And on the first one, I got a 96. On the second one, I got an unheard of within the ICF 99% on an evaluation. And I have passed this out to a number of people who have gone up for certification, and not one person has gotten below a 90 on any evaluation. So, and the other cool part is that it's both spiritual coaches, life coaches, business coaches. It doesn't matter, because the other thing you don't hear in this is that you're looking for a spiritual outcome or a business outcome. We'll talk about more about that in just a second, but it's not really tool-based, it's outcome-based, and I think that's probably the best application of ISD in the process, is we're looking for the outcome, not the micro process of doing it. So, does anybody have any comments on this map? Does it appeal to anybody? Do you think it's just engineering garbage, or what do you think? I like the colors.
Come on, group. What do you think?
Okay, so this is Allie.
I think this is Shri.
I like it, actually. One of the things that I like about it is that it seems to put into words a lot of the intangible things that I think about when I'm trying to be what I call a facilitator versus a trainer.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've captured in a very concrete way and how they're related to each other. So it's very interesting to see in a picture
mm-hmm.
something that you might have been doing without knowing why you were doing it.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to me.
And I tried not to bind anyone. It doesn't make you do something. It just provides a framework, and that's all.
There's a lot of opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of opportunity for tools. If you like a tool, like let's say you like the DISC assessment. This doesn't preclude that at all. So use whatever tools you like. As a matter of fact, we have a tool coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Someone else was trying to make a comment. I'm not sure who that was.
Brian, this is Shri.
Hi, Shri.
Hi. I think you used just the correct word. It is a very good framework, and for me, until now, I really didn't have anything in mind as far as coaching goes. And the next time this framework would be in my mind. So it's very helpful to me to keep this in mind.
And you're welcome to use it. So use it as you see fit, modify it, correct it, change the name so you don't break the title or the trademark, but otherwise you're more than welcome to use it.
And my other question is, like, when you said you're more than welcome to use it, so is it for like just personal, like just for my own benefit, or if I'm with a client, can I kind of share this kind of model?
Sure, as long as you keep the attribution on it, I don't care.
Okay.
You can also, and this is not a sales moment as much as just availing you of an opportunity. I'm going to show you a book that I wrote on how to do this, and you can get that on Amazon. So you can use it with a client. You can do anything you want to with it.
Okay, sounds good. So, thank you.
My pleasure. Okay. So, bless you. Okay, now, the other thing I came up with, another real problem, is that the primary tool of a coach is the good question. Remember I was talking about that person in the classroom where you're sitting behind them, feeding them the right questions? Well, one of the real problems is asking that right question. And what I came up with was this thing called Questions at a Glance. And this is probably my coolest tool I think I've ever come up with. If you look on this page, what you'll see is remember I was saying it's a process, and each one of those colored boxes is a process, and every process, every process has an input and output, right? So on the ISD model, there's the input to the analysis. You do the analysis, then there's an output. Well, the same thing here. So, for example, in the want box, which is that first one, the input is a desire to change, and the output, as you saw in the box itself, was a prioritized want. So if you back up here, and if you look here, you'll see that you can do more of something, you're not sure, you want to do less of something, and you prioritize it. So coming in, you have a desire for a want, and coming out, going into the motivation, is a prioritized want. Nice and easy. So you see here a desire to change, and the output is a prioritized want. But what question do you ask? And the trick is, and one of the high-level requirements for an evaluation of coaching is you have to always stay fully engaged with the client at all times. So the question is, how do you figure out another question and stay simultaneously connected with the client? So what I first said to myself was, well, I'll write up a bunch of questions. But how do you stop and read a document and stay engaged with the client? So then I thought, well, how about if I shrink the question down and use it as a stimulus for a question versus the question itself? And so I came up with a thing called question tips, or Q-tips. And so I broke it into quadrants of where you are. Are you just coming into the box? Are you exiting the box? Is it a supporting question? Is it eliminating an obstacle question? And so it allows you to go to this page, and it's a page of a book, you know, one of those 19 ring things, and you fold it open, and you can see, okay, what do you want to talk about today? How did you do on last week's assignment? Did you want more of that, whatever you're talking about? And as you see on the obstacle side, do you want less of that? It seems like you're struggling to get focused today. You seem to have a lot on your plate. Why are you so full today? And those are kind of questions that you might want to ask. But now here's the other question, is how do you have an entire map? I think there's 12 or 13 of those boxes, those segments. How do you have that entire map and a whole pile of questions? There's 12 questions per box. How do you go from one to the other? So what I built was this book right here, this Questions at a Glance, actually has a row of colored tabs. And the way I did this was I realized, kind of using some right brain, left brain theory, that I can use one side of my brain and continue the conversation, but at the same time, without conscious thought, I can look at the map and see where I am, which box I'm in, see that color, and then flip open to that tab. So there's a red tab, a brown tab, orange, light orange, yellow, green, light green. Each one of those colored boxes corresponds exactly to a colored tab. I can flip it open and pop right to this, so I can do it. I can actually get to the question, the page that I want, with no conscious thought, and then knowing, am I at the beginning of the questions moving into that segment? Am I exiting that section? Is it a support question or an obstacle-based question? So before I even glance at the book, the Questions at a Glance book, I have turned to the right tab. I know which side of the equation I'm on, coming into it or leaving it, whether I'm supporting or removing obstacles, and then I can just, with a blink, I can look at the quadrant that I want to be in and find a question tip that later in the book will be fully explained, and it makes it all nice and clear. So it expands the question. So you go through the book for training, then you use this manual for actually sitting at a desk asking questions. Now, amusingly enough, I mean, I've done this now for 5 or 6 years, and to this day, I still use the map, and I still use this book, because sometimes I'll be talking to somebody, and I'll get so engaged in what they're saying, I am so connected to what they're talking about, that, okay, it's time for the next question, and I don't have a clue. I barely know where I am in the conversation, and so I actually have a little yellow arrow that I use under my desk mat with the map under it, and I actually slide it along so I can tell where which box I'm on in the map. And then if all of a sudden I go dry and I cannot think of a question, then with a flicker of my wrist, I can pop open to a page that provides me with 12 different questions that are totally related to exactly where I am. So this Concentric Coaching book, very prettily done by my graphic illustrator person, and all of these other support books are used to move through the coaching process. Now, very quickly, I want to show you a tool that I use, and I bet without exaggeration, I bet I've got 500 tools that I use, and it all depends on what's needed. And in this particular case, it's the name of my company, and it's the Perception Change System. And it's talking about a person who wants to change how they're perceived by a new boss in this particular case. And so the phrase is, that was then, this is now. So what I do is this is actually blank when I give it to the person, to the client. And this is no particular order. It's just 16 issues. But I want them to go through those environment scans that we talked about earlier, and I want you to come up with a series of characteristics that you think are related to you. So this is actually one used by a client, and what I wanted to say was, in the past, how are you viewed in terms of your maturity? And he viewed himself as a decision maker, that he was serious, but did have a sense of humor, and he goes all the way down through, and he's kind of slow to learn. He's a good learner, but he's a slow learner, and he's physically fit, for example. And then the next path is, what has been his recent perception? And this, I actually have you go talk to peers, go talk to your spouse, go talk to your best friends, talk to your business peers, and find out how you are viewed right now. So in terms of maturity, that he is viewed as a matured person. In terms of he wants to be viewed as a decision maker, but actually he's viewed as an individual contributor. He thinks he's serious. His friends think he's more fun-loving. They agree that he has a sense of humor. He viewed himself as positive, but his perception was that he was actually pessimistic. And so it goes all the way down through here. Then the next thing is, okay, that's how I thought I was. This is how I seem to be, in kind of a 360-degree sort of way. And now the question is, how do I need to be perceived in my new job? And in this case, for example, before he was considered mature in his environment, and now he's going to be looked at fresh, a fresh face in this new environment, but experienced, but still a newbie in the process. Before, he was an individual contributor, and now he has to be a team leader. He used to be fun-loving, and he has to be balanced now between serious and still having a cooperative social sense. And so this is the process that I go through with the client to help look at what was, what is, then what needs to be, and then probably the most important piece is, what is the degree of difference between where you are? How difficult is it to get to where you want to be? And we do this on a scale of 1 to 10, but you don't get to pick 5 because a neutral position doesn't really foment change. And then what we do is the obvious. We pick the easy ones to go after, and let's start building a plan to make the easy changes first. Let's build some success going first. So before you were customer focused, in this new environment you've decided you need to be company focused. So let's talk about what that means for you to look and to be perceived as someone who is company focused. That before you were politically incorrect, now you need to be at least not controversial. How do you do that? Before you were viewed as an internal expert, you knew your product, you knew exactly what you had to do, and now you need to broaden that to not just be an individual task-based performer, but now you need to be viewed as an industry expert, and how do you go about doing that? So this tool, and you're welcome to use this as well, this tool is kind of a what was, what is, what has to be, and then the quickest bang for the buck to start building successes. And then part of our plan that I built with this client was how to go through these 3 things that we selected. He very quickly moved through them, very quickly decided what he had to do, and then all we did was we just looped back through, and then as soon as he kind of got a handle on each of those, then we went to the level 3, then we went to level 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we just worked our way through it. But I wanted him to have a clear idea that this was not a monumental task of changing his entire psyche. All it is changing the perception of how he is. Because they thought he was valuable, they hired him. So the question is just, how do I change the perception of people around me consistent to what I think I need to be? And I think that's it. Yeah. So, just by the way, for all you trainers, this diagram right here came from a program called Wordle, W-R-D-L-E. Go look it up. I think it's wordle.net, I think. Makes some of the coolest word-based graphics. And it's a freebie and very cool little program. So should you need it, I highly recommend it. Plus, you can't beat a good little free utility. So that's the end of what I have to present. Does anyone have any questions? If not, then I have all of your questions that you gave Greg, and I've kind of picked and chosen one question from each person, and I'd like to quickly cover that. So first, I'm going to ask if you have any questions. If not, I'll cut right to your questions. So I'll give you a couple of seconds. If no one jumps in, then I'll just go ahead and run through the questions.
Brian, this is Shri. What was the name of the tool you just mentioned right now?
I'm gonna have Greg give you a copy of this if you want to. This is called the Perception Change System.
No. The one on the next slide.
This one? Oh, Wordle. W-O-R-D-L-E.
Okay. Thanks.
So it's Word L-E.
Okay. Thanks.
And I use it all the time. It's a cool little program.
Okay.
I'll tell you one trick that they don't tell you. Don't put a space between words. Like I have on the lower right-hand corner here, I have no agenda, and it was actually splitting no out over here somewhere. So you have to make it has to be all one word, or a slash or something like that. Otherwise, it throws the words all over the place.
Okay.
Good question. Okay, so this is from Kimberly Johnson. The question is, does coaching and leading work hand in hand with each other? I think coaching is what you do with a leader. I think one of the things that actually, I'm going to ask Greg if I can do another presentation sometime on leadership. I have some real strong opinions about leadership, and I think that they're different skills. It's like training and coaching are different. Coaching and counseling, they're different skill sets. And I think if I were a business leader, I would do anything to have a good coach. And I also want to make very clear the difference between a good coach and a bad coach is it's kind of like a doctor or someone that cuts your hair. As soon as you have a bad one, get rid of them. You can tell almost immediately if the coach is somebody that's actually going to help you get to where you want to be, and if they're just not suited to you, dump them like a hot rock. Because it's way too much work to get halfway through something and then realize, or then actualize that they're bad for you. You know, they might be a nice person, but just not the style that you need. As you can probably guess, I have a very aggressive style, really strong, no BS meter, and I'll dump a client in a second. If they don't want to change, if they don't want to move pretty aggressively, then I'm just not the right person for you. There's a million coaches out there, and you need to make sure that they fit your style. So the question is, does coaching and leadership work hand in hand? I would say that coaches work hand in hand with leaders, but I don't think leading and coaching are really correlated. I think a leader may have coaching skills that they use, but I don't think a leader is a coach. Let's see. This is Sherry Vaughn. I've had success with coaching in various organizations, but as I have grown in my career, I've seen coaching done less and less. Why do you think coaching typically gets ignored? And I think that's for two reasons. Number one, I think it's a conflict of interest internally, typically, not all the time. The accounting gentleman has some very good examples of when it does work. But I think frequently internal coaches are not well skilled, frequently, not all the time. And I think that it's like having bad trainers in your company. If you have really good trainers, then people love the training. If you have really bad coaches, then coaching just becomes a fad that they didn't work, move on. Kind of like quality circles or something. Candace, give an example where coaching would be more beneficial than a training course. If the training isn't necessary and the person just needs to figure out how to integrate better into an organization, that's an example. Training is a skills transfer, right? Education is more cognitive, training is more application, and then once you have those skills, once you have that knowledge, then I think then you can bring coaching into it to help you more fully integrate that information into your organization. This is from Vivian. What do you find to be the key expectations of employees in regard to receiving coaching from leaders? I think most people expect leaders to be good coaches, and I think that most leaders typically are horrendous at coaching because coaching is all about no agenda, and a leader is kind of nothing but a great big pile of agenda. You know, they want you to do something or leading you to a new vision, a new goal, and that's just nothing but agenda. So I think that for a leader to be a coach is very tough, and it's almost kind of a schizoid sort of logic. I think a coach can help a leader, but I won't say never have seen, but I would say that the frequency of a true leader who is a true coach is few and far between. Okay, Maureen Martin, is coaching only used when there are issues or problems with performance? I would say that it is when issues or performance or problems with desire and goal. If your goal is increased performance, then coaching can be very applicable there. Sometimes it's just a matter of, I don't think I fit in. And that's really not a performance issue as it is an integration issue. And so I'm drawing kind of fine lines. You know, I guess it could be argued that everything has to do with performance, but sometimes I think it's just an integration issue, and I think coaching is really good at that integration aspect. It's grayer, it's harder to define, it's miserable to sell, but the truth of it is that if you're missing a skill, then our conversation is going to be about you need to go to training or some other venue to get that skill, then come back and we'll keep coaching. Unless it's something really minor and I happen to have an expertise. But I tend to view performance issues in terms of coaching more about how you choose to do the performance, how you feel about the performance, and how you can integrate that performance into being a more productive individual in your company. This is from Allie, and actually I got two of them for you. Do you see the role of coach growing and developing or changing in the ISD community, and how? I will say for me, yes. I went through heavy industry training, a lot of academic learning, a lot of schooling and education, and then once I sort of got to the point where I felt like I had mastered the ISD and training world, then I wanted to try a different process of helping people. I was very good at telling them what to do. I was very good at finding out what they needed to be told. I was really good at that, and am good at that. But it's a different skill set to help someone do a different thing that's much fuzzier, much grayer, and again, more integrated. It's like it's easy to master, Fitzpatrick levels 1 and 2, but once you start to get to 3, it becomes much more gray and much more difficult. And I don't know one company who has consistently performed a level 4 evaluation. I only know 2 companies that have ever really done it and finished it and actually achieved it, but then as soon as that one advocate left, then it just collapsed immediately. It was not a culturally sustained effort. The coaching brought a new set of skills to me that I was able to use not only in consulting and in coaching, but in my own life with my wife and that sort of thing. So it was more a next step for me than it was anything else. That's not necessarily the process that most coaches have gone through. There is almost no path that people have gone through to become a coach. They come from everywhere, but usually they end up going through a school. Also, another one from Allie is, do you find that leaders today are playing it safe or taking a risk avoidance approach to their roles in leadership? This is going to be kind of a controversial response to that. I don't think people know how to be leaders. I don't think, if you take all of the leadership gurus and you sit them down and say, okay, here's what I have. I have a person who is clearly not a leader. Everybody agrees. This person agrees. Everybody agrees that this person is not a leader. And you put them through leadership school, will they come out a leader? And I actually think no, to a very, very large extent. And so I think that leaders play it safe because, frankly, they don't know what else to do. So I think in the same way that people that don't know what to do next, how do they respond? And the answer is they usually underperform or they overperform. And I think our current economy kind of illustrates that. This is Rolanda. Should coaching or mentoring programs be mandatory and evaluated during the evaluation process? I think it should be mandatory that everybody be an engineer. I'm not sure anybody on this call would agree, but I think they should, and because that would give them a more systematic approach to the universe. I guess I say that in all sarcasm because I don't think everybody should do anything. I think that the only thing I would say should be mandatory is to have coaching and mentoring as a culture within a company, and the only thing that should be mandatory is a very brief class on understanding how you as an individual can make best use of the coaches and mentors that you have within your organization. But that's more of an awareness issue, and you should be aware of the resources that you have in your company, whether it's cheap movie tickets through HR or healthcare, coaching, mentoring. Those are all resources that if you have, you should know about. And so I think just the awareness should be mandatory, but certainly not becoming a coach. Not everybody should be a coach. And William Banks, I ended up with 2 with yours as well. And the question is, with your past experience, what would you say was your biggest challenge when leading others and coaching them to be successful? The first thing is I have consistently been surprised at how defensive people are about what they want to change about themselves. It's hard to get people to tell the truth. And I have this somewhat joking process called the 3 lies. And what I mean by the 3 lies is just an internal process, not something I tell a client. But what I mean is, and I use this for doing task analysis as well, is I'll say, so what do you do? And they say, well, we do ABC. And then I'll say, oh, so you do exactly ABC. Well, not really. What we really do is kind of A subset B subset C. Okay, so I'm going to write this down, and that's exactly what I'm going to tell everybody, is you do this A subset B subset C. Well, not really that way. And then they finally, the 3rd time you ask, they tell the truth. And it's not because they're lying to you. It's because people aren't used to being asked concrete questions. And so as a task analyst in the ISD process, I ask very concrete questions, and it just takes a while for people to get to you. And the same thing with coaching. I'll ask them a question that's sometimes very self-revealing about themselves. You know, is that really true, what you just said? And the first answer is yes, of course it is. Well, is it true all the time? Well, not all the time. Well, is it true most of the time? Well, once he said that to me, you know. So you kind of have to work through it and get to the truth and not just expect the truth to be right up front. And that's been my biggest challenge. And lastly, William asked, did you attend a training course on leadership and coaching, and was it provided internally or externally? I went through Coachville, and I received 250 hours of training with 100 hours of supervised coaching, and then the evaluation process that I had mentioned. And then I became, that's just the school, and then I applied through the International Coach Federation for certification, jumped through all their hoops, and did another 50 hours, did another series of evaluations, did 2,500 hours of coaching necessary to be a PCC, a professional certified coach. And after the 2,500 hours, I submitted, passed the test, passed the orals, and then just like 2 years ago got my PCC. So that's what training courses I did. Whew. So, anybody have any questions on anything to do with coaching that I might be able to help you with?
Hey, Brian, on the thing you just mentioned about all the training that you went through, would you say that's equivalent of going through Six Sigma and acquiring a black belt in project management?
I have a Six Sigma black belt, and actually I have kind of a personal policy. Every year I certify in something. And so probably 5 or 6 years ago I went through the Six Sigma. I think this is much harder than the Six Sigma program. Six Sigma was very intense. It was really about 3 to 4 weeks of really intense learning, training, and application, and then it was over. And the process is kind of, sort of mechanical. And so I could call up somebody and say, hey, how did you do step 14? They would tell me how they did it, and it's probably how I would do it. And so it was very portable. And I have found coaching to be so diverse that it's really not as portable as you might think. And that's the biggest difference I found. Same thing with ISO. I'm an ISO lead auditor. And the ISO process was very, very regimented. I thought Six Sigma was pretty regimented, depending upon what school you went through. I went through the General Motors one. But coaching, it really depends on the school. Like I said earlier, some are very business-oriented, some are very spiritual-oriented, some are life coaching-oriented, and the vocabulary that they use is wildly diverse. And one of the hardest things I had going through the schools was taking the vocabulary that they framed an issue in and interpreting it to fit my reality. And that was a constant battle for me, because especially, and I picked the worst possible way to go, is going from an engineering logic into a life coaching school, not knowing the difference. And I thought coaching was coaching, and that was wildly not true. Good question, though. So did I satisfy everybody's need to know about coaching?
Yes, you did. Thank you. Sure,
my pleasure. This is fun stuff. You know, I have to say I love being a trainer. I love being a consultant trainer. It is who I am. You know, they talk about maintaining a life balance. I have no life balance. I am a trainer through and through, and a coach through and through, and I just love it. And so I don't know. I hope you all are just doing something that is wildly exciting to you, because it's so fun if you do feel like that.
one of the reasons that I asked Brian to talk to us this evening is that, I think many of us, if not all of us, know that training is a solution to only about 20% of the issues in organizations. So, the classic question is, well, what do you do about the other 80%? And coaching is certainly one, strategy or intervention to address that, but it's, for some people, a stretch. And I don't think you can be somebody you're not, but I just wanted to make you aware of different opportunities within our field that maybe you hadn't considered. And coaching, in a way, is very effective because it can be very pinpoint, because we know that training can take a long time. It can be very expensive if we allow it to be. And coaching, in a way, is not inexpensive, but you can get some, I think, good return on investment very quickly if you have a good coach. So
that's very true.
That was one of the reasons I wanted Brian to be here tonight, because I think people have misperceptions sometimes about coaching. So I'm glad Brian was here to talk with us tonight.
And similar to coaching, while I certainly encourage you to spend a few bucks and buy my book, that's about as effective at becoming a coach as reading the Dick and Carey book on the ISD methodology. Great book, doesn't make you a trainer. It's a tool exchange. And so I would recommend that if you want to be a trainer, go to the UMBC ISD program. If you want to be a coach, go to a school. There's a million of them, and just like any other form of learning, there's a million ways to do it. A lot of them are online, a lot of them are by telephone, a lot of them are show up for weekends. But I think in the same way that the ISD program is, it is best done experientially.
Any burning
and if somebody offers
questions?
you a 2-day course in coaching, don't waste your money. It's like a 2-day course in training. It's kind of the same thing.
Well, Brian, I want to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of the class, and
sure.
We really appreciate your time. And like I said, we're going to hear things from you about this particular topic that, I know some people have not even really thought about coaching very much, or again, they have maybe misperceptions. So I appreciate your time. And if people have questions, can they contact you, perhaps?
Yes, as a matter of fact, you're welcome to share the presentation, and I think on the last page is contact information.
Okay.
And I get 10 calls a day with people asking questions about stuff. So don't hesitate, whether you have a training question, an ISD question, a coaching question. If I can help, give me a buzz. I'll be happy to help you out.
And if you want to ask Brian what he thought of Chuck Hodel as a police officer, I'm sure he has an opinion.
Way more effective than he should have been.
Hey, Brian?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you in Ohio when this happened?
Yes, I was.
Were you in Dayton?
Just north of Dayton. I grew up in New York City, and then my parents had this socially obstructing decision to move to Ohio. And Chuck lived in Englewood, and I lived in the town just north of it, and came zooming down through, and he got me.
I'm from Dayton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Chuck went to the my rival high school.
He went to Alter, right?
He went to Alter, and I went to CJ, Chaminade Julian.
And my sister taught at Alter. That's how I happen to know that.
Yes.
So anyhow, yeah, Chuck is all kinds of good guy, and we share a lot in common in terms of values and intensity toward the ISD process. I'm sure you've all seen that, and I think that's something that Greg. I think Greg brings people who have a passion for training around him. Whether it's Stu Weinstein, Chuck Hodel, Brian O'Brien, Carol Erdman, these are people who really, really care about training. And I think if I were going to say the best thing about Greg is he brings the right people to the table to help hopefully transfer that passion to all of the students. I just love being around the program, and a huge advocate of the process.
Well,
and Greg, I still will take that check from you on that. So.
All right. You won't believe what I'll pay you.
Yeah, I will. Well, anyhow, thank you all so much for the really good questions, and Greg, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brian.
You bet.
Okay.
Have a great night.
All right.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Does anybody have any questions for me before we call it an evening here?